thanks very much to the organizers to have proposed me to talk to in this workshop, and in particular in this day dedicated to Mila. So this is something I already talked in a similar event, actually. This is something I had discussed a bit with Mila while we were sharing the same office in Cambridge last year. So I thought she would have been interested. She was interested by what we were trying to analyze. So this is a joint work with Thomas Pock. And we had the idea to understand how to better discretize not really the total variation, which is relatively easy, as you see, but the goal was to extend this to general similar functionals with singularities and to understand how to represent better singular or measures or singularities with finite elements. And with really applications possibly to imaging. So the idea was that we don't want, for instance, to refine too much our discretization and to use discretization which are quite related to the standard grid which is given by the pixels of the image. So Mila was quite interested in the quality of the approximations of things of functionals like the total variation. And we decided to focus on finite elements for reasons which will be made clear, I hope, in this talk. And we wanted to try to understand how to better discretize the gradients. And we found that maybe we think, so now we have to try to understand how to extend that to more complicated objects to understand if it's a good idea. But for the total variation, it seems a good idea to use what is called non-conforming P1 elements, which I will introduce later on. And I will explain why it seems good and the issues that it raises. And actually, the basic idea behind is that you want to discretize more faithfully the directions of a gradient in order to have better edges and better higher order information like curvature or whatever. But you have a price to pay if you don't want to refine your grid. You have to understand that, in fact, you have to have either precise value and bad gradients or good gradients and not very good values. So you'll see how it appears. And then what is interesting in this particular problem, only in 2D and for a very particular meshes, is that you can do some kind of self-adaptive functional, so a simple convex functional, which is a kind of discretization of the total variation, and which inherently corresponds to a self-adapting grid for non-conforming P1 elements. So this is what I will discuss at the end of this talk. So the difficulties when you want to approximate the total variation, which is a bit different from does it work well? Yeah. Which is a bit different from standard, for approximating standard elliptic problems, when in general you expect to have solutions with few singularities, is that here you need to approximate boundaries, you need to approximate sharp transition, and you need to do that on a discrete grid, and very often you don't want to have a very fine grid. And you need to compute accurately the corresponding energy, which is, for instance, for us, if your function is a characteristic of a set, it is the perimeter. And you need to understand how to accurately compute this on a coarse grid, essentially. So usually people use this kind of approximation, which is probably the right thing to do in most applications, in the sense that it's simple and it's very straightforward. It's relatively easy to optimize, and actually, despite some criticism, it is isotropic, but it is isotropic mostly only in the following sense. So the sense is a technical sense which is called gamma convergence. So it means that essentially if you minimize this problem, introduce the pixel, the size of the pixel, which I call h here, and which is of course ideal, send the size of the pixel to 0, but for an image it means you have a very dense discretization and you look at a coarse scale. Then the minimizer of this problem plus some smoother terms will converge actually to the minimizer of the isotropic total variation, so the integral of the gradient, essentially, of the norm of the gradient, plus the corresponding terms. But of course, this particular limit is not pointwise. That's important. It's really for minimizers. And this energy is not really isotropic at fine scales in some sense. And it's obvious to see, and the most obvious example is this example, where you have simply a diagonal edge with respect to your grid, and you measure it with this function. And of course, if your edge is 0, 1, here you will have essentially square root of 2, because each pair of pixels where you measure your norm is crossed both in the horizontal and vertical direction by your edge. While if you measure this particular direction, then you see that for each pair of pixels, only one direction is crossed. And the norm of the gradient here is 1, while here is square root of 2. And here you have to sum all this 1, and you get a length, total length, which is 2. This is a very basic calculation. So on the right, you overestimate your length by 40%, which of course is awful. But still, this result is true, and this result means that when you will minimize your energy, you will never find this. And what will you find? You will find a smooth version of that, because if you smooth this and then compute the same, then you can find back that you get essentially an energy of square root of 2. And this is very clear on experiments. If you solve this discrete approximation of the total variation and find any problem whose solution is a disk, which is easy, then you will get a smooth disk. And you see that it is smooth only in the direction corresponding to this issue. And here, in the direction corresponding to this, it is quite sharp. But in this direction, then you get some smoothing. And with this smoothing, you can recover the correct energy. OK. So the length is relatively correct. The perimeter you find is well approximated, but the solution is not sharp. OK, there have been a lot of approaches to improve discrete approximation of the variation on square grids. There is, for instance, one I tried with colleagues, Stacy Levine and Brad Lussier. You can try to do, so one example, but there are many examples, to do some kind of symmetric treatment of your differences. There is an interesting approach by Aberger and Moisan, which is to oversample the image with a Shannon interpolation and then compute the total variation. It is very, very good, but it's a bit harder to implement, of course. And there is a very simple approach, which is by Laurent Condat from 2 years ago, and which is a bit related to what I will talk about now. And it's very isotropic, so it's better than what we are doing with finite elements, in fact, in practice. It's a bit harder to understand, but we have some interpretation. OK, I won't talk about other classical way to approximate, which is to approximate on a graph. This is a standard thing too. And I will mostly focus here on finite element approaches. So when you do finite elements, you always use, for total variation, you always want to use low order finite elements, because you really expect to have solutions which are singular, which have discontinuities. And even if you have very smooth other terms, you will expect in general to have a solution which are never better than Lipschitz. So it's not, I mean, I did not try so many. I tried once, but it's usually not considered a good idea to try to approximate this with very high order elements. You can do very simple experiments with, for instance, softwares like FreeFEM. It doesn't seem to work very well. Actually, most existing work on finite element approximation are based on P1 conforming elements. In particular, Bartels and his collaborators have worked on this a lot. They have very good error estimates, but in a very particular case, which is for L1 anisotropic TV. So in that case, it's easier. Otherwise, they get usually standard error estimates. I will return to that. And I found also an interesting recent preprint, which goes a bit beyond P1, uses not non-conforming, but discontinuous, which is a bit different, because discontinuous, you allow your discontinuities between your elements, but you pay for that. So you count that in the energy as part of your total variation. So in that sense, it is conforming, in fact, for functions with bounded variation. And it's related to very old approaches. So it was proposed already by Repin in '89 to use this kind of functional to use this kind of approach for functionals like the total variation. And these authors use a dual representation involving Raver-Thomas vector fields. I will introduce what this is. And I must say that looking at that, it's a bit related to Condat's approach. So maybe I will have time to explain, but I'm not too sure. OK, so essentially you find either a P1, conforming P1, or discontinuous but conforming P1 as well in this thing, or dual approaches based on Raver-Thomas, which I will describe. So what is the main issue with doing conforming P1? If you consider a mesh with simplices, and you have the characteristic of a set, and you just project it, so you have your mesh with triangles. Sorry. And assume you have the boundary of a set which goes here, and if you project it in the standard way, then you just will put 0, for instance, here, and 1 here. And of course, if you do that, it's exactly as before for the example I showed with the finite differences variation. Here, for instance, you see that on this triangle, you have 2 0 here and 1 here, so the gradient is in this direction. On this triangle, the gradient in this direction. So the direction of the gradient does not really correspond here to the direction of your boundary, but rather to the direction of your discretization. And actually, when you measure exactly the size of the norm of the gradient which is induced here, you're exactly measuring this length. It is a very simple calculation. And here you will measure this length. Here you will measure this. Sorry, this I have to go to the middle, etc., etc. So in the end, you are approximating your parameter if you project on 0, 1 by exactly the length of this line, which goes through the middle of the edges. Okay. And in practice, so you see that the total variation of this characteristic function is approximated by pointwise, not in the sense of gamma convergence, of course, but pointwise by the perimeter of this polygonal object, which is, of course, essentially larger than what you want in general. So in general, if you use P1 elements and discretize, solve a problem whose solution is a circle, then it works very well. You find a very nice circle. But if you look closely, then you see that your gradients are in fact a bit oscillating, and that you need some smoothing to compensate and to get a correct approximation. Of course, it's not a very large smoothing. You have about like 5 triangles at most in this example for the main transition. And the length is slightly overestimated, but it's quite correct. So how can we do better? So there is a very straightforward idea, but then we'll see that it's also a practical idea. But the very straightforward idea would be to discretize directly the gradient so that you can get a better approximation. Instead of discretizing the function and trying to discretize the points, you just project your gradient. And why is it a good idea? Because if you project your gradient on what I call P0, so P0 is piecewise constant finite element, it means I average each gradient on each triangle or simplex in higher dimension. I call this GT, and I compute this, the integral of this, which is the sum on all triangle of the size of GT times the surface of the triangle. Then clearly I get something which is slightly smaller, which is smaller than the total variation. This is just convexity or Jensen inequality. It means the norm of the average on a triangle is less than the integral of the norm. the average of the norm. So if you compute this, well, this is this function, then you get a smaller value. But it's a bit better than that, because if I called nu t the direction of this vector, and you use the direction of your gradient, then you can compute the difference, and the difference is like a kind of L2 norm of the differences measured in this measure. So in particular, if you have a function which is not oscillating too much, even if it's very sharp, if it's very discontinuous, but if the direction is not oscillating in your triangle, then this is almost zero. So the error in energy is very small if you do that. But of course, I projected my gradients. I don't know if this corresponds to any function. So in fact, one more remark: if you have the characteristic of a set, and if your set is smooth in the sense that it has bounded curvature, and more precisely, if you have a ball condition, so inside and outside you can put a ball, then for instance in 2D you get an error. In general, you get an error which is like h over r squared. So h is the size of the triangle and r the size of this curvature band. So in 2D you get this error, for instance, that your a discrete total variation in some sense is between the perimeter and the perimeter minus h squared. Okay, so it turns out that projecting the gradients like that and taking the average corresponds to a well-known finite element space, which is called the Krauser-Raviat or non-conforming P1 finite element space. And this is essentially defined as piecewise affine functions which are not continuous through the edges of your triangles or simplices, but continuous only at the middle. So this is very loose. You see, it can be very... So the continuity is only at the middle of each facet. Okay, so it's a simple calculation to see that if you take a function, you average on each facet the function and put this value in the middle, then you're building a function like that whose gradient on each triangle is precisely given by the average. So it's some integration by parts, but it's a bit of geometry, but it's very easy. And it has been observed in quite a few papers in the literature, relatively recent literature, that it's a good thing to do, it's a good space to approximate very nonlinear functions of the gradient, because essentially you're projecting your gradient on piecewise constant. So if you have a highly nonlinear function, then you will have a relatively good approximation of your energy. How do you characterize this gradient? So it's interesting to be able to characterize this gradient. So you imagine you have a piecewise constant vector field, which is a constant on each triangle or simplex. How can you say that this is a gradient? So a first thing is that in 2D, it's very easy to show that when you take the average of gradients, you stay orthogonal to rotated P1 gradients. So rotated piecewise affine, gradient of rotated piecewise affine functions, which are continuous. This is a simple calculation. In fact, it's a bit how we came on to that. But in fact, you can show a bit more. In general, in any dimension, you can show if you have a piecewise constant vector field, it is the gradient of Krauser-Raviat function if and only if it is orthogonal to zero divergence, what I call Raviat-Thoma vector field. So let me explain what it is for the one who don't know. So if you're orthogonal with this, it's an if and only if. So it's an extension of this de Rham characterization of gradients in general. Then you are a gradient of Krauser-Raviat. And there is a proof of this fact in 2D, which is a bit complicated, but it's proof of the same fact essentially in a recent paper of Carstensen and you. Just to explain this result, what is a Raviat-Thoma vector field? This is also a very standard thing, and it's a very nice approximation of fields with divergence. So it has been introduced essentially for space like HDiv, where you want to have divergence, and it's a conforming representation of that, which means it's a vector field of piecewise affine functions, which are not necessarily continuous, but they have a true gradient, a true divergence. They have a divergence in the classical sense. And how do you build that? Essentially, you take your triangles, and you take a vector field which is here parallel to the facets, and here has a flux, and here it's parallel to the facets, and it vanishes here. So the fact it's parallel to these facets means that the divergence vanishes through these facets. You don't have divergence. So the basis is made of this. So the main basis. So the degrees of freedom, so if you want the coordinates in the basis are given by the fluxes through the edges. And to get a function which has flux 1 through this edge and 0 through any other edge, you build it like this. So you take this vector field, which is like x minus p plus here. It has a flux here, and then it's minus p, minus x plus p minus here. Okay. And if you compute the divergence of that, then you see that the divergence is 0. No, it's a constant here because this is affine. There is no divergence through this edge because the flux is preserved. And there is no divergence through this edge because the vector field is parallel to the edge. So the divergence of this vector field is simply a P0, which is a constant here and a constant here. So this is how you represent, in a conforming way, vector fields with divergence. Okay, and this is the fields I use in this result. Okay, so this is a small digression. So how do you define now the Kruszer-Rabier total variation? Of course, you define it in the obvious way. You take a function which is, as I said, affine on each triangle and continuous only at the middle of the facets or the edges. And you just compute its variation, but you compute its variation only inside the triangle, and of course you don't count the jumps on the edges or facets. Otherwise it would be a true conforming variation. Here I'm discarding this part. This will raise some issue, but it will have many advantages. So for technical reason, I also introduce for a P0 function, so P0 means piecewise constant. The minimum of these things on all Kruszer-Rabier functions which have the same average on the triangle. So you see here on the triangle you have an affine function, and if you compute its value of the middle, it is the same as its average, and you can consider all the functions which are affine like that, which have the same average value, and you minimize the total variation of all this, and you get this thing, which is a total variation defined for this time for piecewise constant. And this will have an interesting property. So the first thing is that if you introduce that, despite the fact that you have discarded the jumps, you still have a consistent approximation of the total variation in the following weak sense, which is the gamma conversion. So it means if you minimize this kind of object plus other terms, you will solve the right problem in the limit. Okay, that's the first point. The second point is an extension of the previous result I showed you on C2 sets. If you have a function with bounded variation and you have its projection onto CR function, which you obtain by averaging the gradients or averaging the value on the facets, then you get that the total variation, discrete total variation of the projection differs from the total variation by this quantity, which is the kind of L2 difference of the direction. So again, it means that if your function, even if it's very discontinuous or whatever, if it does not rotate too fast at your scale, at the scale of your discretization, then these quantities are almost the same. So you always have an inequality. We already saw that. And we have an error between the two energies, which is depending on the oscillation of the function, of the direction. And there are two nice properties which are useful for the optimization, which will be useful and interesting. One is that this TV0, in fact, can be recovered exactly by this strange duality. So this is almost the same as the standard definition of the total variation, except that here, instead of considering any vector field with a norm that less than 1, I consider only Ravier-Thoma fields, so these piecewise affine fields I mentioned, and I put a constraint only in the center of the triangles, which is not very nice, normally, because if the norm is less than 1 in the center, it doesn't mean it's less than 1 everywhere, so this is not really, this is, for instance, not really below the total variation in this sense, because this vector field could have norm larger than 1 in some places. But it's very nice for optimization because, for instance, if you want to solve this by duality, you only have to look at Ravier-Thoma fields and show some constraint in the center. It's also interesting, an interesting formula for getting error bounds. I will mention that later. And it's also interesting because this has some relationship. I don't think I will have time to explain that, but it has some relationship with Conda's approach for total variation, which is a very similar thing, but on squares instead of triangles. And the second property, which is quite interesting, actually we were quite amazed when we saw that, but it's completely obvious. It stems a bit from the previous one. It's a consequence of that one, is that if you consider an artificial problem where you want to in-paint a straight line, so it's easy. So you have a domain, you have outside of the domain 1 and 0, so an hyperplane. This could be in any dimension, but and you have here any kind of triangulation, so mesh with simplices or triangles, and you want to minimize with respect to the boundary condition 1 and 0 here, and find the best discrete total variation. Then this result says that even if the solution, one solution, for instance, is the projection exactly of this onto Krusze-Ravier function. We will see that it's not necessarily the only solution, but what is important is that this solution is minimal in energy. So it is one really solution of the minimization problem with respect to this boundary condition, and its energy is exactly the length here. So the problem, this discrete problem, has exactly the same value as the continuous problem, which is something interesting because it really doesn't depend on the mesh. That's a bit amazing. And this is very easy because essentially you can derive it from this formula, and it is essentially because for this problem, the normal vector does not oscillate at all. It's a constant thing. So this is 0, essentially. Okay. So you can also use the previous result to derive some standard error bounds. But this is interesting because people in finite elements want to have error bounds, otherwise they are not happy with your results. And these are very standard. If you have, so we have to simplify a bit the setting. So we have two results. One is saying that if you minimize this standard denoising problem, and you minimize the corresponding discrete problem at scale h. H here is really the size of the triangles. Then you get an error which is like H14 in L2 norm. This is a standard error for these problems. It's essentially a one you find in this paper on finite differences. And this is with a restricted assumption on G and omega. And there is one other assumption you can make is that the dual problem has a Lipschitz solution. And why? This is a strange assumption because there is no theorem which gives you conditions under which the dual problem has a Lipschitz solution. And I would be very glad to find one, but it's a very hard issue. But in 2D, it's expected that this happens quite often. And actually, there are very simple explicit examples. For instance, the example I showed with a circle or whatever. These are known to have a Lipschitz vector field as a dual solution. I mean, it's not unique, but one solution is Lipschitz. And in that case, you get a much better error, which is probably the best you can get for this problem, and which is the same these authors have, but they have it for L1 TV, which is much easier, in fact. Okay. So before passing to the last part of this talk, let me show you what this gives on a general unstructured mesh if you use this And for the same problem as before, so what happens here, this is very strange. If you compare to the P1, so the P1 was a bit jaggy here and a bit thick, not very thick, but a bit thick. So here you get a sharper transition. You get much better directions. In fact, you could probably compute a quite precise curvature just by taking the gradient of your directions here. But you get very bad values. You see, the level, if you're interested in the level lines, this is not a good approach, clearly, here. So that's a bit disappointing, but it's also interesting that it's a bit natural if you think about that you cannot get both without refining. And you get a much more precise, at the same scale, you get a much more precise also energy, which is expected. I cannot, unfortunately, I would have liked to prove really error bounds for the energy. I cannot prove any, but this is what you expect with the formulas we got. Here you see you get an energy which is the error is more than 10 times larger for the same scale and the same problem. Okay, so let me just, to finish, mention a funny game you can play with this approximation only in 2D and only for regular mesh. So first, we were quite disappointed by some results, and I will show you which kind of results. Because initially we wanted to use that for curvature-based in paintings and things like that, so we were hoping that it would be very good for doing total variation in painting here. And the theoretical result I illustrated here shows that, in fact, it is very good, so there is no laser anymore. It is very good in the sense that the sharp solution is always a solution for this kind of problem. So you should expect perfect in painting in some sense. But it's not the case, and this is illustrated by this case. So here I consider a very simple problem where I have this discrete finite element grid, so regular grid, and I have two boundary conditions, one which is to put 1 and 1 here, the blue one, and to have a transition which is across the sharp edge here, okay, and one which is to put 1 and 1 here and 0 and 0 here, and to have a transition along these points. So crossing the triangle in some sense is the wrong direction here. And what are the solutions of minimizing this Z-squared total variation with this boundary condition? So by this theorem, or lemma, or whatever you call it, you know that the sharp projection of the characteristic function of the half square in this direction or this direction is a solution. So one solution is to put 1 here everywhere, and 0 here everywhere, and 1/2, 1/2, 1/2 here. And for the red one solution is to put essentially, so here it's a bit harder. For instance, here you would have 0, no 1, here. Here, in fact, you should have 1 and 1/2 here. This is easy to see. And here you should have zeros. Here you should have 1/2. So you have sharp solutions. There exists sharp solutions. But what are all the solutions? And you have that for you. Essentially, this is unique. You can only put 0 here, 1 here. And it's not unique because here you don't have to put 1/2. You can put any value between 0 and 1. Of course, the same value on all points. And you get a solution. And the proof is very easy because you can show that if you reach the minimal value, the gradient is this direction. And since you have put 0 here and 0 here, if the gradient in this direction, you must have 0 here, 0 here, 0 here, etc. This imposes these values. So it's essentially unique up to the points here in this direction, for you. But for V, you know that the gradient must be in this direction. You know that you must go from 1 to 0 here, but there are many ways you can do it. And you can show that there are infinitely many solutions, and even solutions which are never 0 or 1, except on the boundary, and which are very smooth. But still, I said that the approach was consistent. So when the grid goes to 0, you have to converge to the solution. And you do, but you do it in a very smooth way. Okay? You have some exponential decay here. And here you don't see it, of course, but it's not white. And it's not, I mean, It's never. So, okay. So this is, there is one last remark which is interesting and which is at the basis of what we did afterwards, which is that if you consider this bad solution here, okay, one remark which I have to do is that here there is something interesting. What if I consider the other discretization? So I flip these edges. So in this particular case in 2D, there is something very interesting that the nodes don't change. You can keep these nodes here and consider the other discretization with these triangles and these triangles and keep the values at the nodes and say you interpret that as another function if you want. So that's the first point. And what happens if I do that for this solution? Then the way it's built, I can show that if I flip these edges in each square, I increase a lot the variation for this problem. Of course, that's expected because I know that if I flip, then the minimum should be sharp. So this one should be far from minimal. And in fact, I flip it. So this energy is about square root of 2. If I flip it, it's 2. If I flip all the triangle and I keep the same value, I get an energy which is 2. Okay? So this is very natural. The conclusion is very natural. You should not minimize the total variation. You should minimize the maximum here of the total variation on both possible choice in each square. So you consider the nodes, and you say you compute the total variation if the square is cut like this. You compute it if it's cut like that. You get two functions, and you minimize the max of the two. And it's nice because it's still convex. How do you do that in practice? In practice, so maybe it's better to show this drawing. So in practice, you have these fixed nodes. You have a center node here, and you have two possibilities. Either you cut here or you cut here. If you cut here, what is your gradient? Your gradient is simply given in this triangle by this difference in vertical and this horizontal difference. And in this triangle, it's this vertical difference and this horizontal difference. On the other hand, if you cut here, then your gradient in this triangle will be given. So here you have an affine function which is prescribed here, here, here. So the gradient is given by this horizontal, this vertical difference, and here this horizontal, this vertical difference. So the norm here is simply essentially this quantity here, where these are given by the difference I just mentioned. And here it's given by this squared square root, these two numbers here, where these correspond to these two objects here. Okay. So if you introduce this function, then you're precisely doing what I said. You're precisely picking the best of the two directions and minimizing the max of the two possibilities. So you observe here, if you're following, but of course I recognize it's not completely obvious, that I did something very redundant here, because this difference, for instance, appears twice in my vector, and this difference appears twice in my vector. So why should I do that? You could have a two-dimensional vector here, a two-dimensional, and have a slightly more complex function here. So I could do that, but I would not know how to compute the procs of this function. While if I do this redundancy, I have a bit more complicated operators, I have a higher dimension, but it's very easy to compute these procs because it's just an L infinity L2 norm. Okay, so that's the reason for this redundancy. So you can compute these procs. So it means you can solve this kind of problem. So you can do that. You can solve more general, more complicated problem for convex terms here if they are not too complicated, of course. And you can make experiments, and it gives exactly what you expect, that it gives you the sharp solution always when you put these boundary conditions. And it puts the triangles in the right direction. If you compute then afterwards, a posteriori, the direction which is corresponding to your energy, you see that when you have this edge, then you get these triangles. When you have this edge, you get these triangles, as expected. Okay. So we did some experiments to compare essentially the value of the energy with all other similar approximations. So this is finite differences. This is Condat's approach. So I must say Condat's approach is a bit sharper. It's very disappointing. No, well, No, it's not. It's very nice, actually. And actually, it's nice because it has some interpretation in terms of finite elements as well. Okay. And in terms of the energy, they are almost the same too. I mean, in that example, our discretization is a bit better. Of course, it is perfect here. And actually, I suspect it's not perfect here because we did not put exactly the right boundary conditions, because normally if you put the right ones, we should get essentially the same number here. So this is for the length, but this is essentially illustrating this result, that you should get the right energy. And you can do for a slightly more complicated problem where you want to find a disk. So here, you minimize the perimeter of a set times a weight plus the integral on the set of absolute value of x minus some radius. And the solution for this is explicit, it's well known, and you can compare with the true solution. And you get essentially the characteristic of a disk of a given radius which can be computed. And you see that everything works quite well, but this one is a bit more blurry. This one is slightly more blurry than this one, but it's, well, it's almost the same. And in terms of energy, again, these give almost the correct value in terms of length. And this one is not very precise. It has to smooth more, and so you get more, you mix more the radii, in fact, when you smooth. So you introduce some error. Okay, so this is just an example to illustrate on some diagonal, thin diagonal object that you get something very nice, but this is a toy problem, of course. So I will finish here. So what we would like to do is to extend to more complicated geometric problems where we want to discretize, for instance, boundaries with curvature or trees or things like that. So there is still some work to do. To extract higher order information, for instance, even to try to extract curvature from the simple 2D problem. And to extend this in higher dimension, for instance, of course, it's straightforward in the sense that it's a finite element construction. You can extend it to simplices, and all the results, the theoretical results I showed, are valid in any dimension. But the last part with this construction and this flipped edges is not, I have no idea. I mean, there is no way to extend this in a clear way in higher dimension, for instance. So I don't know if we can do something similar. And if we can do something very simple. What happens is that we cannot really, we have tried to do a similar construction on square or cubes rather than triangles. And it's not very clear that you can do the same because there is no clear Kreuzer-Ravier space in that case. So this is still something we have to think about. So I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Questions?
For the error bounds that you get, how the error bounds that you get, how do they compare, for instance, to the work of Bras-Dussier and his student Wang? So you have a power 1/4, right?
Okay, so essentially one is the same and the other is a bit better, but it makes this assumption. So yeah. This one is obtained through essentially the same standard construction which they are doing, or with which most people are doing, which is to have an intermediate scale where you smooth. So you take your problem, you smooth it. So here I smooth the dual variable, so it's a bit different, but essentially it's the same idea. And then you use the regularity of the smooth function, and that's why you lose an order with respect to that one, because the intermediate scale is essentially h1/2. And this one is directly working with the dual field and the duality which is here.
Yes.
But here you see what is the main issue. You have a dual field, which is nice. But if you project it on Ravier-Thoma fields, which is essentially taking the flux on each facet, for instance, then this is not true in general. Then in the center, you will have the norm which will be stellar. So you start from a field which has norm less than 1. you take its flux, and you reconstruct this affine thing. Then in the middle, you can have essentially a norm square root of 2. You get a very large norm. So it's not compatible with this thing. And if you want to get a small norm, that you have to know more on your vector field, and know more is essentially that it's Lipschitz, so that it does not vary too much on your triangle. In that case, the norm is less than 1 in the center. So this is a quite easy construction, but you need to have a Lipschitz field. And if you don't, then you smooth it. You do as Lussier and other, and you get the same error bond they have. They have more general error bond because they did not say G in BV. They put Bezoff. Yeah, they put some spaces which give the rate of convergence for the projection on the finite elements of this function, which appears here.
Yes.
So if you take BV, you take that. If you have BV, you take that.
And does it really depend on the shape of your final elements? For instance, if you replace the triangles with squares, like in Condat construction, do you get the same rates?
No, I don't know how to do this with squares, this particular approximation. So that's something I would like to extend a bit. To understand at least, because Condat falls a bit in the same category, so I expect you could get similar errors with Condat's elements, but you need to understand better with squares.
Other questions? No? No more questions. Okay, so thank you again.